Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is stock. And this verb was suggested by the viewer Artem. So thank you so much for sharing another great idea with us all. Now let's begin to review some of the definitions or the ways that we use the verb stock. The first way you might encounter this verb means to have or keep a supply of a particular product or a type of product available for sale. This is going to be a verb that you might encounter in retail stores. So we'll talk about stocking particular items or maybe particular models of things. A second way stock gets used can mean to provide with a supply of something. So we don't have to just use this in relation to stores. We can talk about our own sort of personal supplies of things. And so we might encounter the verb used in that way. A third and very uncommon way, at least in my world, to encounter this verb stock means to fit a rifle or another firearm with a stock. And that's the part of a barrel and a firing mechanism are attached to that firearm. Again, unless you work with firearms, I don't think you're likely to encounter that particular definition, but it's still good to be aware. For now, you should know that stock is a regular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing. That forms stocking. The past tense and the participle form of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, stock, ends in an unvoiced sound, a k or k sound. This means our ed ending is going to make a T sound, and I'm not going to add an extra syllable as I say it. So the past tense and participle forms of the verb should sound like this: stocked, stocked. Now there are a couple phrasal verbs that you might encounter. The first is to stock up. This can mean to furnish someone, something, or some place with things. An example of this might be the Airbnb host stocked up the home with all kinds of snacks. Right? You can kind of imagine they are providing or supplying snacks for the guests who stay at this particular location. A second way you might encounter stock up, again, very specific in its definition here, but it's used in connection to horses, and particularly when their legs or a leg begins to swell with fluid. Generally, this is in kind of a painless manner. It's not a result of an injury, but still something that has to be watched. So, an example of this: the horse stocked up after spending the night in the small trailer. So maybe the horse wasn't able to lie down comfortably, and this extra standing caused the swelling. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to stock up on. And one way to use this phrasal verb means to acquire the necessary or desired inventory. An example of this might be: we'll stock up on cups and plates before the next event. Really just another way of saying we're going to buy some so we have these things on hand. A second way stock up on gets used can mean to gather, build up, or hoard a supply of something. I have a feeling hoard might be a new verb for many people, and maybe one where we'll have to make a video. But the idea there is you're taking more than what you need. You might even be preventing someone else from getting access to something. So, an example of this might be: people are stocking up on bread and milk before the big snowstorm. So here, that idea of gathering and building up, right? They want to make sure they have these things in case they're not able to get out of their house for a few days. The last phrasal verb we'll discuss today is to stock with. This can mean to fill something or fill a place with a supply of something. An example of this. The store stocks its shelves with locally grown and made products. Okay? So that idea, they're filling their shelves with things that are grown locally or produced locally. Now let's continue to practice our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today we'll practice the imperative and the simple future. We'll start with the imperative. The imperative is rather unique in English. We do not have any stated subjects. So we're going to kind of break our pattern of starting with a subject and then paying attention to our verb. Here, we can just begin our sentences with the base verb. And the reason we're doing that is the imperative is giving a command. So the subject is understood. It's either you singular, if I'm speaking or communicating with one person, or it's you plural, if I'm communicating with two or more people. So again, you might hear this used as a command. So the idea is you're not saying, I think this is a good idea and you should do it, or would you consider doing it, right? You're just telling someone to either do or not do a particular action. Now, sometimes students will tell me that this can feel a bit forward, maybe even a little bit awkward to tell someone else what to do. So please know you can add the word please to the beginning of a sentence or the end. It doesn't need to be in both places though, and that can help people feel a little more confident in their level of politeness. So an example in the affirmative might be, please stock the freezer case next. So we can imagine this is maybe the manager of a grocery store giving a command to an employee, right? This person's going to be responsible for moving product into a display case that also functions as a freezer or keeps things frozen. Now, if you want to make a negative imperative sentence, what you can do is start with do not and then the base verb, or you could use the contraction don't. I've done that in the example here. Don't stock up on toilet paper, there's just no need. Remember how we talked a little bit about that idea of hoarding, taking maybe more than what you want or need? I don't think I'll ever forget at the beginning of the pandemic how there were so many stories and videos of all kinds of stores in the United States not having any toilet paper. I don't know why, but people went out and just bought all of it up, and then our supply chain was a little disrupted, and so then there were people who needed this very essential thing who didn't have it. So I think at times of emergency or crisis, there can still be that urge now to run out and stock up on toilet paper. Now, you'll notice there are no yes or no questions in the imperative. And that, again, that's because we're just telling someone either to do or not to do a particular action. So now we'll move on to the simple future. Today we're going to make sentences with be going to. Be going to is most commonly used as people discuss their plans. And the trickiest thing, perhaps, is that our form of be is going to change with our subject. So we'll be using a present form of be. That means if my subject is I'm going to use am, going to, and then the base verb. If my subject is you, we, or they, I'll use are, A-R-E, going to, and the base verb. And finally, if my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use is, going to, and the base verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. They're going to stock the farm's pond with bass, bluegill, and catfish. So again, back to that second definition of supplying something. Here, what they're talking about supplying is fish, different kinds of fish. Now, if you want to make a negative simple future sentence with be going to, again, start with your subject, pay attention to it so that you use the correct form of be, then use not going to in the base verb. You can see that in the example. The store isn't going to stock this model of cell phone any longer because it hasn't been a big seller. So back to that first definition. What is available for sale? And finally, if you want to ask a yes or no question in the simple future, start with your form of be, whatever form matches that subject. The subject comes next. Then use going to in the base verb. Here's the last example. Are you going to stock the refrigerator? Kind of fill it with supplies. That's what is meant with that particular question. Now let's move on and talk about some words that are related to our verb stock. And there really are just so many. I probably could just do 2 or 3 videos of just related words to stock. But I've tried to highlight maybe some of the more important ones or more useful for your everyday communication. So we're going to start with the noun form of this word. The noun stock has the exact same pronunciation and the exact same spelling as our verb. This noun has a number of different meanings. I have focused just on 4. So the first way you'll hear stock used is to refer to the goods or merchandise that a business has that it might be kind of out on store shelves. It could be in a warehouse, different closets, what have you, but it's going to be available for sale or available for distribution. So an example of this might be, this store has a vast stock of outdoor gear. So it's describing all kinds of things that could be used in the outdoors. Maybe it's specific kinds of shoes and backpacks and water bottles and tents and et cetera, right? So all kinds. Now, a second way you'll hear stock used as a noun means the capital that's raised by a business or corporation through the issuance and purchase of shares. So you might also hear that phrase, shares of stock. So again, kind of this idea of owning a small piece of a publicly traded company. An example of this. My friend bought stock in Google in 2004. He was very smart, and I can remember him being so excited that particular day. Now, a third way you'll hear stock used is to refer that to liquid that is made by cooking. Could be bones, meat, fish, vegetables, in combination with water and other seasonings, very slowly. And then that liquid is eventually used in soups or gravies, different kinds of sauces. So an example of this might be, the soup calls for 4 cups of beef stock. So kind of measuring out a quantity of this type of liquid. Sometimes you'll hear the word broth used, and sometimes those are used interchangeably. Now, the last way I'll talk about using the noun stock is to refer to a person's ancestry or kind of their line of descent. An example of this in a sentence might be, he is of Irish stock, right? So it means his ancestors are from Ireland. Another way we can use the word stock, so again, same spelling as our verb, same pronunciation, but we can also use it as an adjective. So sometimes the way you might encounter this is describing either footage, could be like camera, movie type footage, could be a still picture that is used kind of again and again in different productions. So sometimes people produce a particular image, it's sort of like man with coffee cup, right? And that picture might get used in all sorts of different productions. So, an example of this adjective in a sentence. Sometimes I use stock photos in explaining definitions of certain words. And of course, this isn't a day where I have one of those, but if you're a regular viewer, you have probably noticed occasionally I have kind of a very simple photo to help us see or understand what it is I'm referring to. One last word for us to discuss today. It's the noun stockholder. This refers to a person who has shares in a publicly traded company. Or I guess it doesn't have to be publicly traded. I should make that clear. There are private stockholders in private entities, but commonly when we're talking about things in the news, we're usually or more commonly talking about publicly traded companies. So an example of this in a sentence: the annual stockholder meeting will be held on January 15th. Now, another word that I feel like may be a little more common is shareholder, but again, in various press releases and other communications, you'll see these two words used pretty interchangeably: stockholder, shareholder. Again, I want to say a special thanks to Artem for suggesting today's verb, and I thank you all for watching. Have a great day.